Hello there, and welcome to Nowhere to Hide. I'm Brian Hyde, and today we're going to talk about some of the victories that we enjoyed this year in Idaho, and I mean victories that actually moved the needle in the direction of freedom. But we still have a lot of work ahead of us, and I'm going to explain why that is in just a few moments.
All reporters are biased, the Idaho Press Club are biased, all media, newspaper, radio.
To be completely blunt here, Brian, and there are plans to expand
indoctrination.
That's right.
Well, Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot. That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm like crying.
Nobody wants to see
dark money is influencing policy in our state.
Well, that's not how this works.
Once again, welcome to Nowhere to Hide. You know, freedom is a great thing, or at least if you ask most people, is freedom good or is it bad? Most would say, oh, it's a good thing, but then it becomes a very debatable topic because a lot of people have different ideas. Well, freedom is also dangerous unless it's carefully controlled or regulated at every turn. And so I want to talk today about some of the top priorities for defenders of freedom here in Idaho. And I want to start with a little bit of a thought starter that puts the perspective out there that we really need, and that is, it's not something that you can just outsource. Well, we'll just elect the right people and they'll make us free. It'll just descend on us. No. Charles Caleb Colton said, liberty will not descend to a people. A people must raise themselves to liberty. It's a blessing that must be earned before it can be enjoyed. And look, plain and simple, what it means is you have to understand the principles and practices of freedom, and then you have to be actively involved in making sure that people who are wielding power on your behalf, and yes, I'm talking about people representing you in government, either elected or operating under the authority of elected officials, are properly representing you. And that's where it gets a little bit tricky. And this is where a lot of us are tempted to just, well, I'll vote, okay, but don't bother me because I'm a busy person and I have important things to do. Well, are those things important enough that you can justify, wholesale giving away your freedom in the end? I mean, that's a question only you can answer. But for a lot of people who don't quite understand what freedom is or how you live up to it, to where you find yourself a free person and you become free, it's still a little bit of a mystery. So I want to start with a big win for freedom, and this was for everybody, whether they understand it or not. This was the win for medical freedom last year in Idaho. It was very well fought, and I'm sharing this with you because some of the people who were key behind that are also behind an event that's coming up next month in September. The 17th of September, there will be a showing of Follow the Silenced. And this is a documentary that actually follows the people, not just in Idaho, but across the country and even around the world, who spoke up at a time where it was very difficult to do so without being smeared, canceled, prosecuted, or stripped of your professional licensure. Look at some of the people who are participating here. Actually, I'll show you their names in just a moment, but I want you to know you can go to healthfreedomidaho.com/movie if you would like to learn more and if you would like to get tickets. So here are some of the folks you will be hearing from at this showing of this documentary. Dr. Ryan Cole, remember him? We've had a number of episodes where he has come up, mainly because there were people within the medical establishment, remember the science that could not be questioned, that wanted to take this guy's livelihood away from him for questioning some of the things that they were doing. Isn't it funny, how we were told, the science is settled, and then they would change the directives and the guidelines. And I'm looking at the Centers for Disease Control, which was kind of held up as the preeminent authority on what we should do about masking and social distancing and business and school closures and everything. And they were wrong. They changed their stuff. Their guidelines shifted halfway through. And what did they tell us? I mean, remember, the science was settled. Oh, well, the science evolved. In other words, it was at a whim. It was people in power abusing their power in the name of science and medicine. Well, Dr. Ryan Cole was a pathologist who risked his medical license by speaking out against that false mainstream medical narrative. And he's been vindicated many times over, but they still hate him for speaking the truth. Doug Cameron's an Idaho rancher who was left permanently paralyzed from the waist down following a COVID vaccine injury. Now he's warning others about the mRNA vaccine. Also in this event, you'll be hearing from Brian Festa, an attorney fighting on the front lines to legally hold Big Pharma accountable. Speaking of Big Pharma, that's one of the things that we're seeing play out today with the resignations this week and the firing of the head of the Centers for Disease Control. Why is it that they're so defensive? Why is it that they are so resistant to reform and to accountability? Because if you understand that the CDC has kind of become a plaything, or at least a playground for Big Pharma, it starts to make a lot more sense. There's a lot of money at stake, but your health and your priority of having a healthy life or having healthy medicines or vaccines and that kind of thing takes a secondary consideration to we're going to make money on this. Leslie Manukian, who was one of the instrumental people in getting last year's Medical Freedom Act, or this year's Medical Freedom Act passed here in Idaho. She will also be present at this event on September 17th. And of course, we'll be hearing from IFF President Dr. Ron Nate, Operations Director Sarah McClendon, who is also very much in the trenches and leading the charge for medical freedom here in Idaho. I'm sharing this with you at the beginning of this program so that you have a chance to hopefully check this out and go get yourself some tickets. Hey, maybe we'll see you up there in Nampa on September 17th. All right, top priorities moving forward. Okay, we had some big victories. It's all done, right? No, and that's the key. It never really stops. It's not enough just to be a good person and to live the principles and practices of liberty. You have to be capable of perpetuating them and defending them. And there are always opposition forces that will try to skirt in here or there. Sometimes they come in and try to take it away wholesale, but they're always pushing, and there's always that tension trying to remove us from our liberty while we're trying to defend it. So top priorities moving ahead in 2026. And this is after talking to my friend Jake, who is the communications director for the Idaho Freedom Foundation. Eliminating property taxes is going to be a big one. Now, Governor DeSantis in Florida just has made this a top priority in his state. In fact, I think they may have actually succeeded. I've got to double check on this, but it's always been vigorously resisted. But Florida is leading out. Maybe it's Idaho's turn to step up. We're going to talk about that in some detail. And also there's going to be a priority on expanding school choice for homeschoolers. Now, this is mostly in the form of deregulation, letting the money follow the student and not tying the parents down with a bunch of bureaucratic red tape to make sure that it benefits the education establishment or bureaucracy at the expense of having true choice for your child's education. And last but not least, protecting Idaho state sovereignty. Now, this may offend some people who are strong supporters of Trump, but I heard Trump just a couple of weeks ago talk about, well, the states have to do what the federal government tells them. That is 180 degrees inverse from the principle of federalism on which this country was founded. And it's not that there aren't some things where the states do yield to the federal government. Those are things described within the Constitution. They are very carefully described and enumerated and limited. But it seems like we don't see a lot of observance of those limitations. And so it's up to the states to step up and say, we are not going to march in lockstep here, and we're not going to participate. By the way, you'll probably see a big fight over Idaho's sovereignty should legislators succeed in repealing the Medicaid expansion, because there are federal dollars tied to that. And I'm sure there's a federal judge somewhere who can find, some kind of creative emanation or penumbra within the Constitution that says, no, you have to pay for these benefits in perpetuity, like it or not. States, it's your job to do what we tell you. At any rate, let's dive into the topic of property taxes. I was happy to see that former State Senator Scott Herndon is going to be back in the running for the state Senate next year. And I believe he served in 2022 and 2023. Scott was one of those people just unintimidated by, media onslaughts and attacks by people who just can't stand the idea of limited government, let alone conservative ideology. But one of the things that he is standing on very firm is ending property taxes. And this is a little excerpt from his press release announcing his run for the state Senate. Scott is running on a firm belief that in the face of an insurmountable national debt, unaffordable housing, and massive inflation on food, gas, and the cost of living. By the way, is he wrong on any of those? Do we all feel that? I think most of us do. Now it's time to permanently eliminate all property taxes and control Idaho state spending without raising other taxes. Well, how can we do that? We're going to get to that in just a moment. Herndon said, our founding fathers had a vision for this country, free, sovereign states that govern themselves with minimal federal intrusion, a sound monetary policy, and no national debt. That was the norm at one time. Not so much today. But he says low government regulation, low taxation, and free market capitalism is the best recipe for liberty and prosperity for every Idahoan. That will be something we'll be keeping an eye on. So next I want to talk about when it comes to eliminating taxes of any kind, whether it's the sales tax or property tax or whatever, there's always pushback on this because, well, how is the state going to function? And it comes from this premise, which I don't know is a true premise. It's posited as if, well, everybody knows this, it's self-evident, but the idea that the sun could not rise if it weren't for some state agency somewhere making it so. All right, well, Stop Idaho Rhinos, I thought, had a really great post on their Substack on the 13th of August about that three-legged stool that we hear about. Well, we need that three-legged stool of income tax and sales tax and property tax. Here's what they say. The truth is the three-legged stool is not conservative in any sense of the word. It's not about limited government, personal freedom, or fiscal responsibility. It's about ensuring government is always well fed. Ooh, that hurts, but it's true. It's about creating a system where government never has to go without, no matter how reckless its spending habits get. And we have talked about that quite a bit here lately, haven't we? A household that overspends is forced to cut back. Under the three-legged stool, government just leans harder on another tax and keeps spending like nothing happened. So for people who will continue to defend it, the reason that they want to defend it is because, well, we have to keep, if we take away one of those legs or we shorten one of those legs, then we'll just, strengthen the other ones, but they're still going to keep taxing at the same level. So the worst part is how completely this model entangles government in every part of your life. So income tax, that's a direct hit on your labor. You work, you earn, the government takes a piece before you even see your paycheck. Sales tax hits you every time you try to buy something, whether it's groceries or clothes or a cup of coffee. And property tax, well, that's the one that proves you never truly own your home or land. Essentially, you're renting it from the government for life. Don't pay the rent, and the real, wink, wink, owner will show up and take it away, even if you have paid off your mortgage. And so I asked, does that seem right to you? Does that seem in keeping with the prospect of good government and freedom? I think for most thinking people, the answer would be, no. So what do we do about it? Okay, this is where we become informed. This is where we remain active. This is where we take the time to not outsource all of that heavy lifting to others, but to be a part of the process. A lot of people have been doing it. I mean, I've given you some solid examples here in the last 10 minutes. Maybe it's your turn to step up. I mean, if you feel that fire in your belly that says, hey, I don't like this, or I don't think this is sustainable, what Scott Herndon describes about, the insurmountable national debt, the mounting inflation, the cost of everything, it's not a sustainable system or not a sustainable approach. So at some point, it's got to change. What comes next? Well, that's where you and I have some influence. Let's make sure we're using it wisely. I'm Brian Hyde, and this is Nowhere to Hide.
All reporters are biased. The Idaho Press Club are biased. All media, newspaper, radio.
To be completely blunt here, Brian, and there are plans to expand
indoctrination.
That's right.
Well, Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot. That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm like crying.
Nobody wants to see
Dark money is influencing policy in our state.
Well, that's not how this works.